and a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a building in downtown Chicago, about to sign the biggest contract of my career, when my father called. He never calls. That was the first thing that should have told me something was wrong, not with my grandmother, but with him. His voice was shaking, barely holding together. "It's Nana. She collapsed at the house. They're rushing her to the hospital right now. The doctors are saying it could be a massive stroke. They need a deposit for the emergency neuro unit. $2 million. They won't transfer her without it." I heard a woman crying in the background. Maybe my mother. Maybe someone else. My pen was still hovering over the contract. 12 people were watching me. I said I'd call back in 5 minutes, hung up, and walked out of the room without signing. My name is Brennan Calloway, and this is the story of how my own family tried to rob me blind using the one person I loved most, and what happened when they realized I've been watching the whole time. Before I get into it, I want to know you're with me. Drop a comment, say listening, tell me where you're from. I read every single one, and it means more than you know. And if stories about family betrayal and fighting back speak to you, hit subscribe. It keeps this channel alive, and it keeps these stories coming. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I grew up on the south side of Milwaukee in a narrow brick house with a leaking roof and a grandmother who made it feel like a castle. Nana Ruth raised me from the time I was 6, after my mother decided she wasn't cut out for parenthood, and my father decided he agreed with her. They didn't disappear completely, that would have been cleaner. Instead, they drifted to the edges, showing up at holidays with gifts that felt like receipts, proof they'd done something even if they hadn't done enough. My older brother Landon stayed with them. He was their golden project, the one they poured every dollar into. Private tutoring, travel baseball, a car at 16, college fully paid. Landon got the spotlight. I got Nana's kitchen table and her stubborn belief that hard work would eventually speak louder than favoritism. She was right, it just took longer than either of us expected. I put myself through college working overnight shifts at a warehouse, graduated with an engineering degree, and spent 6 years climbing through a construction management firm until I launched my own, Calloway Development. Small at first, a few residential rehabs in Wicker Park, then a strip mall in Oak Park, then the contract that changed everything. A 40-unit mixed-use development on the North Shore. The kind of deal that doesn't come twice. That's where I was the day my father called. I stood in the hallway of that office building with my phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding, trying to think clearly. $2 million. I had it. Barely. Most of my liquidity was tied to the development, but I had a reserve account, a safety net I'd built over years of never trusting that the ground beneath me was solid. My father was still talking, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. They're saying if she doesn't get to the neurocenter in the next few hours, the damage could be permanent. Brennan, please. I know we haven't been. I know things haven't been. Just help her. Please. I called the hospital. That's the thing nobody in my family expected me to do. I hung up on my father and dialed St. Anne's Medical Center in Milwaukee directly. Asked for the emergency department. Gave them Nana's full name. Ruth Elaine Calloway. Date of birth, March 3rd, 1941. The nurse checked. Checked again. Sir, we don't have anyone by that name admitted today. I called 2 more hospitals. Nothing. Then I called Nana's landline. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hey baby, you caught me in the middle of my show. What's going on? She was fine. She was sitting in her recliner, watching a courtroom reality show and eating butter pecan ice cream. She hadn't fallen, hadn't collapsed, hadn't been near a hospital since her knee replacement 2 years ago. My father had lied. Not a small lie, not a misunderstanding. A full performance with a shaking voice and a crying woman in the background and a number. 2 million. Chosen because they knew exactly how much I had saved. I stood in that hallway for a long time after I hung up with Nana. The city moved around me, elevators dinging, shoes clicking on marble. I felt the kind of anger that doesn't burn hot. It freezes. It turns everything sharp and still and dangerously clear. I walked back into the conference room and signed the contract. That night, instead of celebrating the biggest deal of my career, I sat in my apartment in Lincoln Park with a glass of bourbon and started pulling Freds. My father had known about the reserve account because 6 months earlier, during a rare family dinner at my parents' house in Brookfield, my mother had asked me how the business was going. I'd been stupid enough to feel flattered by the attention. Told them about the development deal, about the reserve fund, about how I finally built something stable. My mother smiled and said she was proud. My father shook my hand. Landon raised a glass and said, "Little brother's finally making it." I should have known then. Callaway pride doesn't include being happy for someone else's success. It just calculates how to redirect it. I spent the next week quietly, went to Milwaukee on a Tuesday, sat with Nana in her kitchen while rain streaked the windows and the smell of cornbread filled the room. I didn't tell her what happened, not yet. I just wanted to be near someone whose love didn't come with the price tag. But I did something else while I was there. I drove past my parents' house and noticed Landon's truck parked outside, which was odd because Landon was supposed to be in Arizona working a construction job he bragged about at that dinner. I parked a block away and watched. 20 minutes later, my mother came out carrying a garment bag. My father had a rolling suitcase and Landon was loading golf clubs into the bed of his truck. They were dressed like people going somewhere warm and expensive. I took photos. Timestamps, license plates, everything. When I got back to Chicago, I called my accountant and asked him to run a full audit on every account my father had ever had signing authority on. This is the part of the story where things get ugly. See, when Nana set up her estate years ago, she gave my father limited power of attorney over her household trust, a fund she'd built from decades of work as a school administrator. It was meant to cover her care, her house, her modest needs, about $800,000 total. My father was supposed to manage it conservatively, pay her property taxes, keep up the house, handle medical bills. That was all. The audit came back 10 days later, and I had to read the numbers twice. Over 4 years, my father had siphoned $620,000 from Nana's trust. Small amounts at first, routed through shell invoices disguised as home repairs and medical expenses. The money went to Landon's failed restaurant venture, my parents' timeshare in Scottsdale, and a down payment on a lake house in the Dells that Nana had never once visited. They had been stealing from a 78-year-old woman who still clipped coupons and washed Ziploc bags to reuse them. I sat with those documents spread across my kitchen counter and felt something inside me rearrange itself permanently. Not just anger, a kind of architectural resolve, the same instinct I use when I look at a broken building and know exactly which wall to take down first. I called Nana's neighbor, Mrs. Padilla, and asked her to keep an eye out. Told her I'd been worried about some things and wanted to make sure no one was pressuring Nana. She said she'd noticed my parents visiting more often lately, always with paperwork, always leaving in a hurry. Then I hired a lawyer, not a family attorney, not a mediator, a forensic financial litigator named Desiree Okafor, who had spent 15 years prosecuting white-collar fraud before going private. I sat in her office in the Loop and laid everything out. The fake emergency call, the trust fund drainage, the shell invoices, the photos of my family loading golf clubs into a truck the same week they claimed Nana was dying. Desiree didn't blink. She looked at the numbers, looked at me, and said, "This isn't just breach of fiduciary duty. This is elder financial abuse. If we move correctly, your father could face felony charges." I told her to move correctly. While Desiree prepared the legal filings, I took one more step. I knew my family would try again. The fake emergency call had failed, but they didn't know it had failed. I'd never called my father back, never confronted him. As far as he knew, I'd simply been too busy to help and might still be guilted into it later. So I set a trap. I called my mother the following Sunday, kept my voice casual. Told her the development deal had closed and that I'd moved my reserve funds into a new high-yield account at First Continental. A real bank, but a fake account number. I mentioned the amount, $2.2 million, and said I was thinking about setting up a family trust to help with Nana's long-term care. I wanted to see if they'd take the bait. My mother's voice changed on the word trust. It got warmer, softer, the way a hand gets when it's reaching for something it wants. "That's so thoughtful, Brennan. Your father and I were just saying how we should all sit down and talk about Nana's future." 3 days later, my father called again. Same trembling voice, same urgency. This time, the story was different. Nana had fallen down the basement stairs. She was conscious, but they needed money for an emergency home renovation to make the house accessible. Contractors were demanding payment up front, and could I wire $400,000 to an account he'd set up for the project? I recorded the call, every word. Then I called Nana. She was in her garden pulling weeds. Her basement stairs were fine. She hadn't fallen anywhere. I played the recording for Desiree the next morning. She smiled in a way that told me we had everything we needed. The next 3 weeks moved like a chess game played in fast forward. Desiree filed an emergency petition to revoke my father's power of attorney over Nana's trust. She submitted the audit, the shell invoices, both recorded phone calls, and a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Padilla documenting my parents' frequent visits with paperwork. A judge granted the emergency order within 72 hours. My father's access to Nana's trust was frozen, but I didn't tell my family, not yet, because there was something else happening. Landon had posted on Facebook that our parents were throwing a family celebration at the lake house in Wisconsin Dells, the lake house bought with Nana's stolen money. 30 guests. Catered. A live band. The invitation said it was to honor 3 generations of Callaway legacy. I almost laughed. They were throwing a party with money they'd taken from a woman who saves butter containers. I told Desiree about the party. She said it was my decision. The legal case was already airtight. But if I wanted the family to face what they'd done in front of the people they'd been performing for, this was the moment. I drove up to the Dells on a Saturday morning in October. The leaves were turning, orange and gold lining the 2-lane highway like the edges of a letter being sealed. The lake house was beautiful. I'll give them that. Cedar and glass, a wide deck overlooking the water, lanterns strung between the trees. My parents had outdone themselves, or rather, Nana's money had. I arrived early before most of the guests. My mother saw me first. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: surprise, then calculation, then a wide, practiced smile. "Brennan, we didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. My father shook my hand too hard. Landon gave me a one-armed hug and a beer I didn't open. The guests filtered in throughout the afternoon. Aunts and uncles, cousins, my parents' friends from the country club, a few of Landon's buddies, everyone laughing, eating, complimenting the house. I waited until dinner. My father stood up at the head of the long table on the deck, the lake shimmering behind him, and raised his glass. "This house represents everything the Callaway family stands for," he said. "Hard work, loyalty, and taking care of our own." I let him finish. Then I stood up. "I'd like to add something to that," I said. The table went quiet. 30 faces turned toward me. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "This house," I said calmly, "was purchased with $185,000 stolen from Nana Ruth's trust fund, the trust our father was supposed to manage for her care." The silence was instant and total. Even the crickets seemed to pause. My father's face went red. "Brennan, what the hell are you?" "I have the records," I said. I pulled out a folder from the bag I'd brought and laid it on the table. 4 years of transfers. Shell invoices for home repairs that never happened. Medical expenses for treatments Nana never received. $620,000 redirected to Landon's restaurant, your timeshare in Scottsdale, and this house. I let the folder sit there. People leaned in. My Uncle Gary picked up one of the pages and his eyebrows climbed his forehead. "And 2 weeks ago," I continued, "Dad called me pretending Nana had been rushed to the hospital with a stroke. He asked me to wire $2 million for emergency treatment. I called the hospital. She wasn't there. She was at home watching TV. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped against the deck. "That is not what happened. You're twisting everything." Then 3 days ago, he called again, said Nana fell down the stairs and needed $400,000 for home renovations. I pulled out my phone, pressed play. My father's recorded voice filled the air, shaking and desperate, telling me about a fall that never happened in a house that was perfectly fine. Every person at that table heard it. My Aunt Linda covered her mouth. My cousin Derek set his glass down and stared at my father like he'd never seen him before. When the recording ended, I put my phone away. "A judge has already frozen Dad's access to Nana's trust," I said. "I've been granted emergency conservatorship. Every dollar that was taken will be returned." My father slammed both hands on the table. "You ungrateful little, I raised you." "Nana raised me," I said quietly. "You visited." That one landed. I saw it hit him somewhere behind the anger, in a place he'd probably stopped visiting years ago. My mother sank back into her chair, her composure gone, her eyes darting between the guests like she was trying to calculate which friendships could survive this. Landon hadn't moved. He sat at the far end of the table, beer in hand, staring at the wood grain. When I looked at him, he looked up. His eyes were wet. "I didn't know where the money came from," he said. Not loud, not defiant, just tired. Maybe not at first, I said. But you knew Nana wasn't paying for your restaurant. You knew she wasn't funding a lake house she's never seen. You chose not to ask. He didn't argue. He set the beer down and walked inside without another word. The party broke apart after that. People left in clusters, whispering to each other in the driveway. My Uncle Gary pulled me aside and said he'd testify if needed. My Aunt Linda hugged me and cried. A few of my parents' friends left without saying goodbye to anyone. My mother found me by my car as I was leaving. The lanterns were still glowing behind her, making everything look soft and warm in a way that felt like a lie. "You've destroyed this family," she said. "No," I said. "I just showed everyone what you built it on." She didn't respond. She turned and walked back toward the house, and for a second she looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen her. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not victory, just a deep, aching sadness that this was what it took. The weeks after the party moved with the slow weight of things that can't be undone. Desiree filed the full civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty and elder financial abuse. The county prosecutor's office opened a parallel criminal investigation after reviewing our evidence. My father hired a defense attorney who sent an aggressive letter demanding we drop the case, calling it a family disagreement blown out of proportion. Desiree responded with 46 pages of documentation. We didn't hear from that attorney again. The hardest part was telling Nana. I drove to Milwaukee on a Wednesday evening, brought her favorite rotisserie chicken and potato salad from the deli on National Avenue. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped me with homework, where she'd taught me that showing up matters more than showing off. I laid it out as gently as I could. Her son had been stealing from her trust for years. The house in the Dells, Landon's restaurant, the timeshare, all paid for with her money. And twice he had called me pretending she was dying to try to get more. Nana listened, without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long time, her hands folded on the table, the kitchen clock ticking in the silence. "I suspected," she said finally, "not the details, but I felt the shape of it. The way they started bringing papers for me to sign without explaining them, the way your father got nervous when I asked questions." She looked at me with eyes that were hurt but not broken. I kept hoping I was wrong. "I'm sorry, Nana. Don't you dare apologize for them," she said firmly. "You did what needed doing. Your grandfather would have done the same." She reached across the table and held my hand, her grip stronger than I expected, and I realized that this woman who saved Ziploc bags and clipped coupons and raised me when no one else wanted to was the toughest person I'd ever know. The criminal case resolved 4 months later. My father pleaded guilty to 1 count of financial exploitation of an elderly person and 1 count of wire fraud. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution. My mother, who the investigation showed had co-signed several of the fraudulent invoices, received 12 months of probation and community service. The lake house was seized and sold. The proceeds went back into Nana's trust. Landon reached out once, about 2 months after the sentencing, a text message at 11 at night. "I should have seen it. I should have said something. I'm sorry. I read it 3 times. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything." Some silences aren't cold, they're just honest. We weren't ready for more than that, and I didn't want to pretend we were. I put $200,000 of my own money into renovating Nana's house. New roof, new plumbing, a walk-in shower so she didn't have to climb into a tub, a garden bed in the backyard because she said the thing she missed most about being young was kneeling in the dirt without worrying about getting back up. I hired Mrs. Padilla's daughter to check in on her 3 times a week. I also set up something I'd been thinking about since the night I sat in my apartment pulling threads. The Ruth Calloway Fund, a small foundation that provides legal resources to families dealing with elder financial abuse. Because what I learned through all of this is that my story isn't rare. It happens in houses on every block in America. Someone's parent, someone's grandparent, quietly being drained by the people who were supposed to protect them. And most of the time, nobody checks. Nobody calls the hospital. Nobody pulls the thread. The development on the North Shore broke ground in the spring. I sit on the site in a hard hat watching the first beams go up, and I thought about Nana's kitchen table. About the nights I sat there wondering if working hard actually led anywhere. It does. It just doesn't always lead where you expect. Last month, Nana called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was on the terrace of my apartment, the Chicago skyline sharp and bright against a cold blue sky. She said she'd been going through old boxes in the attic and found something she wanted me to have. When I visited the following weekend, she handed me a small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside was my grandfather's pocket watch, the one he carried every day of his 40-year career as a machinist. On the back, engraved in letters so small I had to hold it up to the light, it said, "Honest work outlasts everything." I put it on the shelf in my office next to the signed contract from my first development deal. Two objects from two different lifetimes that somehow said the same thing. Some nights I still think about that first phone call, my father's voice breaking, the fake urgency, the way he weaponized love to get to money. I think about how close I came to wiring $2 million without checking. How one phone call to a hospital changed the entire trajectory of my family. And I think about Nana sitting in her recliner, eating butter pecan ice cream, perfectly fine, while the people who were supposed to love her were busy figuring out how to spend her future. They couldn't take what mattered. They never could, because what mattered was never in an account. It was in a kitchen in Milwaukee, at a table with a wobbly leg, where a woman who saved everything taught me that the most valuable thing you can build is something no one can steal from you: your integrity. And that's my story. If it resonated with you, if you've been through something like this or you know someone who has, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about people who fought back when their own families tried to break them, tap subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.